Okay. I think that you don't take squirrels and feed them a lot and hope to get elephants is the quote of the morning so far. Ronnie, we'll see if we can beat that.
For sure, for sure.
And the other thing from that session actually was fascinating. Microsoft had almost no usage of this AI tool among its sales force, and somehow got it to where their salespeople were using 70% of their time with customers, kind of reversing it. The steps between that, I think, and Katie's insights about that were really important. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Just to tell you, we're going to have a coffee break after this. I'm here with Ronnie Chatterji. He is OpenAI's first chief economist, leading the company's research on how AI is reshaping work, productivity, and the economy. Before joining OpenAI in late 2024, you're a professor at Duke, where his research focused on how technology diffuses across organizations, very relevant to the conversation today. Served in the Biden administration as chief economist of the Commerce Department, among other positions. So Ronnie and his team have published some of the most comprehensive data about how people and enterprises are actually using ChatGPT and other AI tools. And so the conversation today is in part to sort of understand, to get these insights and understand how people are using them, what works, and how we can actually all apply these things. So Ronnie, thank you for joining us here.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. It's great to be here. I really enjoyed the previous panels and learned a lot from them, too.
OK, great. Well, there's a high bar for us to hear. You've described this moment as the in-between times, between AI's invention and its commercialization at scale. What do the data tell you about where most organizations are actually at right now?
Well, when I started the job, when you're an economist, usually people aren't like rushing up to talk to you at cocktail parties and stuff like that. And when I started studying AI, I started to get these questions a lot. Is this for real? Are enterprises adopting this? What's going to be the future of work? And so with my team, we set out to write a bunch of papers to figure some of this out. And that's the best thing about being the chief economist at OpenAI. I am the first. I hope I'm not the last if I do my job well. But as I think through this, we see two things on the consumer side and maybe the enterprise side I want to remark on. One is when we analyze the consumer data in terms of how regular people are using it, we found that a large percentage of the messages, more than 3/4, are in really three categories. Seeking information, practical guidance, and writing. And when we first came out with that information, it's in a paper called How Do People Use ChatGPT? It's not the most creative title, but I always wanted to write a very clean paper like that.
Very good SEO.
Yeah, exactly. You got it. It's for the SEO. So people were sort of underwhelmed. They said, well, wait, I thought AI is going to change the world. I thought AI is going to drive GDP growth and productivity, and we're going to see all these big changes in the economy. And for an economist, what's really interesting is that, right, practical guidance, seeking information, writing, that is creating a lot of value. It's just hidden. It's called consumer surplus in the language of economics, and it doesn't show up in our GDP statistics. When I save time planning my vacation, or I'm able to come up with an activity for my kids, that doesn't show up in GDP. A lot of the things you do at home don't. But it's freeing me up to do a lot of other things, and it's creating a lot of value. And a lot of new technology, particularly free technology, like a lot of our users are free users, creates a lot of value that way. And so that paper kind of laid the foundation to say we should be looking for GDP growth. We should be looking for productivity at work. But we also have to be thinking about the ways people are actually using AI and recognizing that value. And I think that is probably the hidden productivity story of ChatGPT. I think you all probably have your stories of how you've been more productive at home, and that's not going to show up in anything related to economic statistics. In the enterprise, it's a different story. And the one thing I'll say is that we're seeing a lot of uptick in enterprise usage. I mean, this past year, we have about 1 million business customers. And when you think about those business customers, the number of messages that they sent last year, the average user increased about 30%. So it's really important in this job for me, like you read all the headlines, enterprise AI is going up, enterprise AI is going down, it's all a bust, it's all a boom. We try to look at things like messaging volume, what people are using it for, and we're seeing a really large increase that outstrips a lot of previous technologies in terms of how fast they've grown. The thing to look in, though, is who is driving the increase in messages. And I think you all can recognize these people in your own enterprise. There are power users who are using this much, much more intensely than the median user. So we like to do the 95th percentile cut versus the median worker. And you find that the 95th percentile worker is sending many, many more messages and using a lot more compute. They're doing more compute-intensive tool calls and other activities, like data analysis, for example, than the median user. And so the question for all organizations are, who are these people? Maybe you all are in the room, maybe you're not. And do we want the median worker to look like our frontier worker? And what is that process going to look like? So that's what kind of our data has taught us so far, and it leads to lots of other questions for research and for practice.
I want to talk about power, come back to power users, but was there any difference in terms of the specific uses that enterprise users were putting ChatGPT to compared to consumers? You named the...
Yeah. Coding and data analysis are much more popular in the enterprise compared to in the consumer, as you might imagine. I mean, a lot of us are vibe coding now, but in the enterprise, right, you're going to see more of these sort of workplace productivity uses. But writing is really a popular use case in the enterprise. I think we forget sometimes because writing sort of seems mundane. It's the foundation of white-collar work. We're writing messages to each other all day. What's the first thing you're going to do when you get out of this room? Write a message to somebody, right? So AI is being used. Hopefully it's a good message, right? Or you'll quote the thing about the elephant and the squirrel. Yeah, exactly. A cup of coffee first and then that. Yeah. But as you think through this, right, writing is the foundation of how we do work in these organizations, and that's a really popular use in the enterprise. And so it's not surprising to me that we're summarizing meetings, we're writing things to each other, we're making PowerPoint decks. That is a really popular use case in the enterprise as well.
Do you think like in 3 or 5 years, those are the uses people are going to have? Because we're at this, as you've said, we're in this kind of interim phase. Like, are those the sort of primitive starter
I think this
uses?
is how it starts. We're kind of in the early innings is the way I think about it. When you work at this job, people are they're either really, really impatient with you or they have questions about like some really esoteric use case. That's the kind of things I get. Yeah. And for the people who are impatient, they say, when is the AI revolution going to show up? Am I still going to be using it as a chatbot in 2 or 3 years? And I think if you look at this very narrowly and think that somehow we're going to be talking to chatbots in 5 years as the main way we interact with AI, I think you're probably missing the boat. If that is true, we're not going to see huge productivity increases. There's only so much you can get from talking to a chatbot. AI is going to be integrated into our work the way that like software is integrated to everything in this room. It's like the DNA of the built environment. That's what AI is going to be like. And AI is going to power our ability to write software, which I think is like the biggest story probably of 2025 that we learned from us and a lot of our fellow frontier labs, but also other companies that are using this as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you don't think the chatbot will be the primary way that we use it in a few years?
It's interesting. I think there's something natural about dialogue, what we're doing here now. I did a panel at a literary festival of all things. You get invited to weird things when you're at OpenAI, right? And I talked to sort of a literary critic, and he took me through the history of how dialogue is just foundational to who we are as humans. It's not an accident that product market fit for AI came through a chatbot, right? We like to chat, we like to text. It mimics something that's very natural to us. Yeah. I think it's more of an entryway, though, into a much broader use of AI going forward. Okay. And if you think about the way you use software today, right, it's not the same way you used it on your Apple IIgs, right, or even whatever first device you encountered. And I think it's going to change for AI, too.
Okay. Let's go to the power users, back to the power users, and just how, like, what the takeaways are for people. Did you notice was there any sort of attributes of power users, like their personality, their roles, organizational culture? Like what defined this group?
These are the people who are always trying new stuff, right? You know that person in your office who's always trying like the new tools. Like if I could kind of craft the persona of this person, like they're the one who brought in like the very complicated coffee maker and they want to spend all the time to get it right. And I just want to come in like 3 months later and be like, tell me how to use this, right? It's that person is a short version of it. But often, okay, they legal and HR are actually pretty well represented. You might think it's a super technical person all the time. That's not always the case. We're finding that legal and HR, partly because they work with a lot of structured data, there's a lot of CHROs in the room, and right, they have a lot of writing to do in their job. They're using AI quite intensely, and often you'll find a lot of workflows taking place in HR and legal. Mm-hmm. People who have prior coding skills, who are comfortable with technology, are definitely on the leading edge as well. Mm-hmm. What's interesting to me is those are also the people who are sending the most written messages, but they're also using the most tools. So it's not like we have poets and quants. We have poets and quants in terms of how they're using AI. The challenge is this could be someone, a power user, who's sitting right next to you, right? Somebody who's very different doing the same function as you. So you are seeing this interesting sort of lack of diffusion in some larger organizations between the power users and the median users. And I guess my challenge for organizational leaders is like, how are you going to bridge that gap? I have some ideas, but I think it's a big challenge for people in the organization. Yeah. In smaller organizations, you don't see that gap between the power users as much because a lot of those organizations, like small kind of companies in San Francisco, there's just a few workers, number one. They're all working together often or remotely. And the workflows that they built up are AI native, right? So it's one thing if you're in an organization and you're trying to re-engineer a workflow around AI, and you're like, we used to have humans doing this, and now we're going to have AI and humans doing this together. That's a long process, and there's turf battles and identity threats and issues of not wanting to change. Yeah. For a company starting off that doesn't have a bunch of people in a particular division, they're just going to use AI from the beginning. It makes it easier.
And it sounds like size can be a disadvantage, too, because people don't have the same proximity. Definitely. So you said, what are the ways in which organizations can bridge the gap between the power power, presumably you want to bridge the gap between the power users and others. And how do you do that?
So first I'd say, I think most organizations do want to bridge that gap. One key thing is there is a change management component to AI. I feel like one thing a lot of companies are missing, whenever I get like on an enterprise call with a bunch of our clients, I usually estimate the probability that this project will be successful by the rank of the people who are on the call. And in the past, so you might think about it differently. You'd say, okay, if the younger tech-savvy people are on the call, that means it's really going to work. No, those are the people who are more excited about it. Some of them are power users, the evangelists in the organizations. There is reverse mentoring going on. But there needs to be change management from the top often to make this stuff work. If you want to do a very small pilot and test it, what often happens is you have a successful pilot, but then you never know how to scale because you don't have the buy-in from senior leadership. They're like, that's great, what do I do with the pilot?
Yeah.
And so I feel
that's
like
the
when
squirrel
that's right, that's the
elephant.
squirrel that can't become the elephant. So I feel like when you see the leader on the call who's committed not just to dropping AI into the organization, but also putting the accompanying change management. This is like the organizational behavior toolkit that a lot of us learn in business school. This part has to come along with AI.
Yeah.
And when I see they're committed to bringing the humans along with AI, I sort of update my probabilities upward. And what is good change management? It's the stuff we learned already, right? In terms of how to lead a transformation. It comes out with stating clearly your objectives, figuring out what you're going to measure, bringing people along through sessions that could be small groups, large groups, and then getting intermediate milestones and updates and pivoting if you're not moving in the right direction. All these things are really important to change management. Dropping AI in like a SaaS software solution from like 5 years ago is not going to have that same kind of impact. And so that's the biggest mistake organizations make, not bringing the humans along. They think AI speaks for itself. And as amazing as ChatGPT is, you need to have human leadership, which is what actually makes me really excited about our careers going forward, because I think there's going to be a really strong role for humans to complement AI in that direction.
Okay. That's a great thing to hear from the chief economist of OpenAI, that there is a role for humans. Thank you.
If I'm wrong, I won't be here either. So it's fine. Yeah, exactly.
So are there any other hacks that you've seen, as you've studied enterprise adoption, are there any hacks that you've seen that organizations have used that are correlated with greater success in AI?
Not everyone has great data in their organization on how people are using AI. It's a big challenge. So a lot of like my value, I don't work at the scale because it's only me and a small team, but I talk to a lot of our clients where I can get deep into their data. I can kind of show them, here's what your power users are doing. I often try to look as a hack in terms of who those workflows are touching in the organization. If someone set up a really good market research workflow or a due diligence workflow, I try to figure out, okay, which other parts of the org is it touching? And who should it be touching? Like, how come legal's not in this conversation, or the corp fin team isn't in this conversation? If you can look at things that got granularity, and like I can help our clients do that, then you can start to say, okay, why aren't these two divisions working together? So that's definitely one hack. The second thing I'll say is people are trying to measure time savings, but then when they come up with time savings, they don't know how to quantify that. And it's very unsatisfying. So I've met many, many companies who said, okay, our people save 6 hours a week, and then they want me to like multiply it by the average wage and all these other things. In the end, right, what are you actually measuring? And it's like OpenAI can give you some answers, but it actually does, and I think this was said by the executive from IBM and Microsoft too, which is you have to decide what you want to measure, right? You should tell us what your business objectives are and how AI can achieve those. If those aren't well articulated, it's going to be really, really hard. So less of a hack, more of just like a basic best practice for a lot of these things. The last one, and this is a little not based on sort of empirical research, just like a feel. I feel like people choose things that are too small and they choose things that are too big. Like the really small ones I mentioned with the pilots, the really big things, like the billion, multi-billion dollar questions are really hard to attack with an AI implementation. And again, it's a little bit of a feel, and I hope it can be somewhat useful, but like somehow picking those medium problems, I found like those are organizations that actually are more successful. It's hard for me to scope that, it depends on the size of the org, but I've seen this often, like way too ambitious, over-claiming transformation projects, really small, uninspiring pilots that have nowhere to go.
Is there an example that comes to mind of like the middle that?
One of our clients, I mean, so this is public, we work with John Deere, right? And I found a lot of their work, it isn't necessarily, well, first of all, tractors are really technologically sophisticated pieces of equipment, as we've all learned. But one really interesting thing is the part supply for those tractors in terms of replacement parts. It's a really big part of how you maintain a tractor. You need to get the parts if you're out there, right, to keep the thing going. It isn't the sexiest piece, but it's an inventory and supply chain problem. So it's a big part of their business, right? But it's not sort of disrupting or entering a new business. It's actually trying to make something really important, an important plank of what they do, more efficient. They've had a lot of success with that.
Okay, great. So just to go back, your hacks include like look at what the workflows are touching, so involve everyone in it. identify the kind of data or the KPIs for business performance, I think, and then choose projects that are just the right size, not too small or not too big.
And the last one, maybe more quantitative, we study a lot when new models get introduced, 5.2, 5.3, et cetera. You need to track how your users are using the capabilities of the new models, right? This is capability overhang, which we want to talk about. There's a big difference between what our models can do and how people use them. Yeah. And that is the biggest story of AI, I think, in 2026, is closing that gap. And so the power users are often at the frontier of using the capabilities, and when a new model comes out, they're doing new stuff, right? Sometimes, though, there's a little bit of a lag. And the question is, why aren't people actually exploiting the full capabilities of the models? This is something to look at sort of internally. Yeah. I will say, don't just think about it internally in your firm, right? I've had power users inside your organization compared to the median. There's also power organizations. You got to be thinking about your competition. One thing I see a lot is there are entire organizations where people are sending 2 times as many messages, using different kinds of tools and capabilities. That competitor analysis is also important because it's not just about diffusion in your organization, it's also about the competitive landscape.
So what are the implications of all of this for talent strategy? So like who you hire, how you reconfigure jobs, what you train people for, like I guess what's your advice to the room about how to think about that?
I feel like I get asked a lot to give like a mini graduation speech. Everyone's like, what should my kid do? The future. No,
it's here, you have the floor.
Yeah, exactly,
please.
right, exactly. Well, fellow graduates. No, it's at the end of the day, though, it's a hard question. I have 3 kids, and I try to think about like, what kinds of skills do I want them to get? How do I want them to approach learning? And I will say it depends on, for me, the age and stage and what you're trying to accomplish. For people on the job right now, you're interviewing, I still think, and the executive from Microsoft mentioned this, and IBM too, which is that we still have a lot of people who are coding. Like the one biggest fail of last year was when people said, "Oh wow, there's all these great coding tools. Like we're not going to have as many coders." But there's no rule that says you only have to write a certain amount of code. Like we can write more code. Like that's the story of growth, right? Yeah. So the idea that like now we can write more code, better code, different code with coding assistance, and it opens up the ability for more people to write code. We find like 75% of people who are using ChatGPT are acquiring a new skill or working on something new they didn't know. And so if that can involve coding, you see like a large increase in non-technical people using coding, of course, with ChatGPT Enterprise. Yeah. So I would say, first is, let's not assume that the world is going to stay the same. And that was never true. I mean, honestly, like if people told you, hey, do this profession, you're guaranteed to have a good life, that was a prediction, but it was always based on some probability, right? So things are very dynamic now, but there's no sort of perfect path on that. I will say when you're hiring, you're still going to look for technical skills and foundational skills. Why? Even if ChatGPT can pass the data science exam that I give my applicants, I still need that person to stand up for me or Sam or whoever and basically say, look, here's what the data means. If we actually ran this in production, here's what would happen. Yeah. And if we have a question about an assumption behind this or one of the calculations, you're accountable, not AI. Right? So it's the same thing I tell my MBA students. So in the end of the day, you need to have the technical fluency to be able to interpret the output and explain it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to persuade anyone anything. And so I think it's a good reason to remember, whether you're in front of a classroom or training folks, why we do this. AI is going to be a complement to humans in that way too. As they say in business, right, you always want like someone to be accountable. There's other less elegant ways to say that. And humans, at the end of the day, are going to be accountable. And so you're going to be accountable for your output, and you're still testing for those things. The other thing is table stakes now for any young person. You're going to get asked in your interview, how are you using AI now, right? And you're going to have to come up with 3 really interesting workflows you've built. You're going to have to show the ability to do things that sort of make your own division more efficient. This is what I'm asking my team all the time. So if you're advising like a young person for their first job, that is like the first question in every interview for every role. If you don't have an answer for that, you should got to prep more for the interview. Yeah,
and it seems like, just to underscore what you just said, that there is a value to expertise. And there is some of the initial research suggested that it was the lower level workers in call centers and elsewhere who benefited while more expert workers didn't. But that finding is being kind of reversed or
depends on the context. Some of those studies, great work, looks at call centers. And they find that the lower skilled or less tenured employees, they use AI and they catch up to the people who are the most experienced. In a call center, that may be the case because the types of skills you need or the expertise to get to the 95th percentile answering those calls is different than if I'm like in a biochemistry lab, right? In other areas, they found this at like BCG and consulting firms where it's a different kind of expertise, different judgment, that it's actually helped a lot of the people who are sort of already at the top get better and become more productive, which is more similar to a story of technological change that happened over the last 25 years. They call it skill-biased technical change, the idea that these technologies have helped people with more skills. This is something from the impact side we really have to watch. When I was growing up, the biggest conversation was around the digital divide. I think people remember this. And with AI, you're going to have a similar thing between power users and people who aren't using it, people in, let's say, the United States versus other countries. And if we don't work to close that gap, all the things that AI can do, only a small section of people are going to be able to realize those benefits. And so that's something to watch going forward.
So just to wrap up, you said you expect to see more impact on jobs in the next 18 to 36 months. What do you think that'll look like, and what should the leaders in this room be doing now to prepare?
It depends a bit on industry. I think the tasks are definitely changing for workers who are coming in with quantitative backgrounds. If you're a data scientist, it's no longer good enough to just have like the paint by numbers, like sort of data skills and software packages. You're going to need to be interacting with AI in every organization and trying to find insight and judgment. And that's harder for junior people. We just have to be honest about that. So we're going to have to work more on that in our data science classes and our training to make sure we're teaching that. How many quantitative classes do you take in undergrad where there's a real serious presentation component? As someone who's taught more tool building classes, but also more kind of narrative classes, we often sort of give a short shrift to like presentations in class and teamwork in the more quantitative classes. That stuff's gonna be really, really important, right? Because if you just know the skills and you have sort of a generic degree in data science, it's not enough. Yeah. And so I do think that as you look at it as talent leaders, you have to make sure that you're identifying people who can combine and ultimately be a complement to AI and grow with it. Yeah. I think the last thing is there's going to need a requirement here around resilience and flexibility. I mean, I feel at OpenAI, my job has changed every 3 months. Most of the people who I work with, their job is really dynamic. And that can be really scary. And but when I bring young people in the organization, I'm always saying, look, the job you're doing today is probably not going to be the job you're doing in 3 months. I need you to be ready for that. And it's not enough maybe for a boss to say that. You also have to give people the skills and support so they can be flexible and resilient. And that's a whole nother sort of area that I think we have to work on a lot.
So among the things I'm hearing that are key are expertise is still valued. You have power users for the people you really need to look at and try and generalize what they're doing. And then, as you just said, flexibility. People be able to evolve as the technology does and the organization does. Yep. Ronnie, Chatterji from OpenAI, thank you very much for this great conversation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you.
So for those of you here, we now have about a 20-minute coffee break, so you can go out to into the room, get some coffee, and we'll continue. As you see, we try and keep the program pretty fast and we have more ahead before lunch.